Today we're going to watch some people build some of the best ag fence that you can possibly build at a competitive level to try and hone their skills.
It's the true nature of the job, really. If you can build a fence properly by hand and it works under test, it takes technique and know-how. And if you can get gear in the ground and it stays there under load, then it proves that you know what you're doing. So that's really why we still do it by hand.
There's going to be a lot of things I think they're looking at, just kind of fit and finish, how straight it is, how tight it is, you know, how well their struts fit on their ranch braces. The cool thing about this is that the winner of this competition is going to go to the Golden Pliers competition in New Zealand, which is arguably the biggest hand fencing competition that there is in the world. Now, my understanding is that they've got a 4-hour time limit. However, with not having to set the king posts and only focusing on their line posts and their wire, most people speculate that they'll finish in a couple hours. We had these shirts made because ordinarily fencing is not a spectator sport. We want you to get in there and get dirty. It is a spectator sport today and today only. So in the hand competition, one of the things that they are allowed to use is they're allowed to use augers and obviously power tools. The big thing is that they can't use big equipment to pound their posts, so they're using things like hand chisels to fine tune their ranch brace. This would be the diagonal that's going to go into the ground, and there's a pretty specific formula for doing this so that we have a good tight fit, and that's one of the things the judges will be looking for, is to make sure that everything fits really nice. And I can see on this cut here, I would think maybe they're going to take away a little bit of points because that top angle there is really supposed to be flat, is what they're going for. And then when that strut is placed inside this cut, we want that to be all flush up against the wood that's being cut out. So getting that angle correct, and you can see it's a little bit sharp there, but when they drop that other end down in there, hopefully that angle will reduce and meet up flush with the post. The one thing I don't know about is how deep he's going into the post here. My understanding is that really they're only looking for about 1 inch of penetration. What we don't want to do is cut out so much of the post that we're cutting into that treat and causing a potential rot spot. And I know that blade's getting all the way in there, so I don't know if that's correct. But I was taught that it's only about 1 inch that we're going into that, so that has me a little bit concerned as I watch this. Whether they take all that meat out of there, I don't know. But this fit is definitely something the judges are going to be watching for. They're going to be looking for fit all the way around. They want it to be just as tight as humanly possible. They want no slop, and they don't want that strut to be shorter than the distance to the block that you'll see here coming up here in just a little bit. We don't want that post getting pulled over to be tight. It needs to already be tight, and that strut needs to be under tension before they even put any wire on this. You can see here they've got their staples stapled all the way around their post just to help make it easy to get their wire in the right spot, because that's another thing the judges will be looking at is that wire even all the way around the post, you know, not canted. So this is Sebring Jessup here. Sebring's doing a great job of hauling that hefty piece of equipment, and while this may look easy, those one-man augers are a man-eater. They are terrible to run, and they're going pretty deep into the ground, so they can save a lot of work. I wouldn't want to do that by hand necessarily, but it's definitely a workout to run one of those things. As you can see, Sebring's really wrestling that thing. I'm certainly glad we don't have just hand augers to put our posts in the ground, because skid steers are so much faster and easier. Or better yet, driving them, if we can, driving them using our Bryce Suma 180 is a great way to go. But this is the hand competition, and they're not allowed to do that. There you can get a little bit of an idea as he slides that strut up there at just how deep that's going in. Now he's trying to just perfect his cut, make sure everything's nice and tight. And we basically want that to be a friction fit almost all the way around, so it's getting almost jammed in there. You don't want any extra space, because the whole point is to try and seal out water and bacteria and as much stuff as we can. And if we can press those two pieces of wood together, that makes it a lot easier. Ah, the old double shovels. Gotta love that. Looks to me, I can't tell how deep they're going, but maybe about 3 feet with all that. And because they're being very specific about how far and how on everything, this really reminds me, when they come starting inspecting this stuff, it really reminds me of some inspectors that we see on federal jobs. This is literally what they do, is they walk around with tape measures and just try and catch you messing up, it feels like. This is going to be the other end of their strut. Here you can see he's using a nice bush pig spade to dig his hole, and if you need good bush pig equipment, we've got that in the link down below in the description. But that's what he's using here, is a bush pig spade to help shovel those out. And the nice thing about those is they're so heavy that they really make light work of this. even in some pretty tough ground, you can use them as kind of a digging bar, and you've got a nice solid edge and a heavy feel in your hand. So that's why everybody uses these particular shovels to be able to do this underground work. That block you see laying on the ground, he'll be inserting that into the ground. And the point of this is to have that block 6 inches below the soil surface. So they've got to dig this deep enough that the top edge of that block is 6 inches below grade. And the big reason for that is that we've gotten past the air and bacteria things that are going to cause rot in those items. The other thing he's going to want to do is make sure that that block is in exactly the right spot, because we don't want to cut anything off of that strut if we can avoid it, to open up that post where it hasn't been treated. Here you can see he's tamping the post. Strain-Rite makes a great post rammer, is what they call it. We call them tamping bars here in the US, but Strain-Rite's a New Zealand company. They call them post rammers, and that's typically what we use for packing the dirt in. And most importantly, the top and the bottom are what we need to spend the extra time on, making sure that we get good compaction top and bottom. The middle's not as critical, although I would pay plenty of attention to everything all the way down. But the top and the bottom are what are going to determine how tight your post is set. Now this is what every fence builder hates, is somebody watching them work, but that's these guys' only job, is to watch these guys put this together so that when it's all said and done, they can judge the final product. In our business, we call these orange hat people, and that's because we work for YDOT. And my experience is these guys gathering around and watching you work is never a good thing, and it usually only leads to bad things happening. Hopefully the winning competitor doesn't feel like that in this particular case. These guys are well-meaning and well-intentioned. This is the laying out of the wire. They're just pulling their strands of high tensile wire to the ends and laying all that stuff out. Again, you can see how those staples come into play and help make sure that that wire is perfect all the way around the post. As you can see here, this is how to tie a high tensile wire knot, and the only proper way to terminate high tensile fence. So they'll do a lazy loop and then 2 solid loops, and then you'll see him using that handle to help him with it, and then he'll ring that back towards the post and it'll just snap right off. That's a great example of how to tie a proper high tensile wire knot. So he just spins that using that handle right back to the post and snaps that wire right off, so we don't have any sharp ends. So typically high tensile wire is broken off, not cut. There's one of those high quality Strain-Rite post rammers down at the other end. You can see how they've trenched some of the ground to make sure that that strut can lie in there. You're stapling all the wire on. Just remember, if you're going to staple your wire on, another thing I would look at is I would look at the staple twist, because staples are only supposed to be twisted one way. There's a right way and a wrong way, and if you twist it the right way, the 2 legs spread apart, and if you spread it the wrong way, they will overlap across the wire inside the wood and not be near as strong, not have near the holding power. It was really nice of our judges from New Zealand to come over, and then that's Steve Sarson in the white and black hat that used to work for Beckert, so I like to think he knows a couple things about putting up some fence. And here they're getting ready to tension up all their high tensile wires using the Strain-Rite, and that looks like not sure which one that is, but it's definitely got the removable handle, it looked like, on one of them. You can see why it's kind of nice to have several of them. I think the reason that they're not stretching them up individually is they're trying to put the entire fence under tension. And one of the things they're being judged on is where their wire knots line up. So if they put all of them under tension, the same type of tension, then tie all the knots, then hopefully all their knots will line up down the post without getting pulled one way or another. So I believe that's why they use six of these rather than just using one and going from one to the next. Now here they're using a Strain-Rite wire tension tester, which tells them how much tension the wire is under. And then these are battens. I think that's what they call them in New Zealand, is battens. And they're just tying that like we would tie a T-post. He's got a nice little tool there for making that fairly easy. The only thing I would recommend is on most specs, if you're working on any federal projects, it'll tell you that you have to have a twist and a wrap and a half on both sides of that tie. So I can't see them tying the other side, but a lot of times there's just a hook on the other side and people will leave that untied. And it makes it pretty easy to knock those off, for livestock to knock those off over time. This team here, I haven't mentioned their names, but this is David Jordan and Dylan Herndon. Here they're using their tension tester to make sure everything's tensioned great. And then they're kind of knocking their wires over too. We don't want them on the face of the post. We want those knocked about 1/3 of the way around. One thing I will mention is for that wire tension tester to work properly, you do actually want to hold it flat, not leave it hanging down on the fence. You want to basically rotate it 90 degrees so that it's perfectly flat. This is Jason Day. You'll see him use it. He's going to put it on here, and then he pulls that thing up there flat, and that's the proper way to use those tension testers. Also made by Strain-Rite. And so they'll go through and they'll test all these wires to make sure every single one of these wires is under the proper tension. A little bit over is not as bad as a little bit under. This is Deuce Brown and Logan Taylor. See, this is what I would call a story pole, and if I was doing this, I would probably use one of those stays and mark that, and then set all my wires using that via the grade. A story pole is a really nice way without having to bring a tape measure to every single line wire. Just makes it a little easier to mark out your post and know where to staple the wire onto the post and be very consistent. Here they had to rake all their dirt into a pile for their braces, but all the line post dirt had to be hauled to the end of the fence as a part of the competition, so you'll see them picking up that mess, and it's just part of making sure that you're leaving a good, solid, clean, finished product. That was Deuce there indicating that that was their time, and that was super important in this competition because the first person to finish didn't get any points deducted. Every team that finished after the first team got points deducted, so it was kind of a big deal to finish first, and I think that's a real life scenario where you're trying to finish in a decent amount of time, be efficient about what you're doing, but also make sure that you're leaving a good product. So a time constraint is a good thing, I think. That's what we work under in the real world. And here you can see Dylan's just double checking everything before he calls time, just making sure everything's good. You can see that we're using, this is high tensile wire, so they're using a high tensile wire knot. They're gonna be looking to make sure that these wire knots are all basically aligned and that they're very uniform. The more uniform these are, the better. So you can see this is a really good wire knot right up here, but this one maybe looks like it got a little sloppy. I would imagine they're probably gonna deduct for that. They're gonna be looking for things like the fitment on this ranch brace. They're gonna be looking for whether or not it's centered on the post, if there's any gaps, like I think there may be a small gap on this side. This chip out stuff, they don't typically like to see any of this chip out. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, on some of this, they like to see this cut maybe flatter, so more flat like this on that cut where we've got an angle down now. Down here on the block, I heard them mention that they're looking for 6 inches. They want 6 inches of soil on top of the block just to help keep that block from being pressed out. And then they're looking for a good solid fit. They want this block all the way up against really nice tight soil so that that hopefully doesn't give way. Obviously, if we cut our strut short and then had to pack dirt in here behind this block to make it work, then that dirt has a potential to settle and then let that king post, which is that big end post, is called the king post, tilt over, thereby making things weaker. They don't want any cuts down here on this end of the post. They want this to be factory and they want it to be beat into place. I think most of these people probably expanded their trench when they knew how long their strut was to make sure that they got that good tight fit, and most of these people were having to beat these struts down onto that stress block. The droppers, I call these droppers, or, well, we call these stays in the US. These are all clipped in. It looks like maybe, I noticed this person did basically a 3/4 wrap on this side and just a regular, use the ordinary hook on this side. So I don't know if they're looking for that stuff, but in a chain link fence, if I was judging this, I would want to see a 1.5 wrap, which is the standard spec for any chain link type fencing when you're using ties like that. Probably having this sticking out is maybe not great. This one we did a little different. So there again, like we were talking in the beginning, if you're going to do something, be uniform about it. This time they got that 1.5 wrap, but then on this side, still nothing. I don't know if that matters to the judges or not. How well they space their wire, if it's nice and even, and then how they've driven their staples. Depending on the type of staples they have, there is a correct way and an incorrect way to drive a staple. The barbs on the staples, and if I could show you one, the barbs on the staples are cut in such a manner that it should spread it out. So if you drive this staple and the barbs are faced the wrong way, it'll actually cross on the wire and it'll hold in the post like that and not be as strong. What you want those to do is spread out opposite and get further away from each other to really hold that staple in. And so they're going to be looking to make sure the staples are all oriented the correct way, that the posts are set to the correct depth, and that's going to be based on the ground level and how it flows, making sure all the posts are plumb and then in line, especially these king posts that were already driven. So they're going to want to make sure those king posts are perfectly plumb, because if they aren't plumb, there's a good chance they got pulled over when they were stretching up and tensioning their wire. And it's really going to come down to the small stuff, really like the really super nitpicky stuff. And it's interesting to note that every other fence that was done in a prior year are quite a bit looser than these. And I don't know if that's because they moved or maybe they weren't as tight last year, but it makes me wonder. If I can go grab this wire and it's all super tight and then that wire is a little bit looser, I have to think something moved or something has changed. So maybe a level would prove that out. If those posts were plumb last year and now they're not, we would know for sure if those king posts had started to fail for some reason. This line wire, they want it about 1/3 over, so not right here in the middle of the post, but they want it right about here. So I don't know if they'll get they'll get a little mark off of them for this. And that's a really easy fix. A lot of times you can just kick this over. It helps take away some of that twisting or that torque action that happens on that post, because if this post all of a sudden starts twisting because of the wire tension, it'll have the potential to spit that strut out, and then you have a problem because you've got a failed brace. So this end is the same fence and it looks really, really good. I mean, I'm seeing very good even work here. This is a lot flatter, this cut here. Again, I think they're going to be looking to make sure that this thing's fairly well centered. This looks maybe just slightly off center. I'm not sure, but it looks like maybe we could have been over here just a little bit further just to get it centered up so that we don't have a potential for that thing to twist. I would imagine that they don't want too much shaved off of this. I think they're going for about a 4" by 4" block cut into this king post. And if you do these right, when you're driving that in, you can actually preload your brace just a little bit because your strut's a little long, and that helps give you something to pull against, so that if the ground does settle a little bit when you're pulling tension on it, you're back to plumb when it's all said and done. So preloading one of these king posts or your end post on a ranch brace is fairly common. To try and knock it out just a little bit to give yourself some play, because the ground will compress just a teeny bit. That's quite a load for it to carry. The two people that did this fence competed last year, and the level of work and skill that they've done from one year to the next is significantly increased. And that's why people do this, is because they're trying to hone their craft. They're trying to show other people that they're honing their craft and just stay sharp. Looks really good and straight. I mean, I like the look of this fence. And here, after everything's all done, this is just the judging team, and they are literally checking every single thing they can think to check. I mean, he's got a square out. I don't know what he's looking for there, but he's looking for something. That is Mr. White out of New Zealand. Him and his wife, Debbie, are very much instrumental in making sure that the Golden Fence Pliers happens in New Zealand every year. That is Bryce Taylor's son. Bryce Taylor was one of the judges. That's Jason Day, just double checking everything. And Jason builds some high quality fences. Really all these guys are high quality fence builders. And this is the tally up. Everybody's just dying to know who won this thing. Yeah, this is Deuce and Logan's winning fence, and they just did a solid job. You know, not only did they finish on time, but if you went around and looked at all the work, you were like, yeah, these guys really came to compete and built a very, very nice fence. So that completes the Platinum Double Strainers Championship here at the East Coast Fence Rivalry in Galax, Virginia. Tomorrow they're going to have the machine competition, so stay tuned for that footage coming out. Be sure to keep following us. I'm Mark with SWI in Wyoming, visiting Virginia, and I hope you have a good dang day.